Good day, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Why You Do What You Do by the Building Industry Association's Bay Area Young Professionals. I'm your host, Mark Sherlock. Today's guest is the current Planning Commissioner in Novato, California, and Vice President at MLC Holdings. Please welcome Justin Derby. Justin, great to have you on the show today. How you doing?
I'm doing good, Mark. Thanks for having me.
You got it. So, Justin, I gave you a brief description of the format. We got 3 questions for you. Answer them however you like, but we'll get going. So, Justin, how did you get to become, and I'm going to add this, the current planning commissioner at Novato and the vice president at MLC Holdings?
Good question. I think I'll get into why I'm a planning commissioner. It's a appointed position. I did not have to run for that, and I would encourage anyone that's reading this or watching this, I should say, to consider running or trying to get appointed as a planning commissioner in your city. I think we could use as many people from our industry as possible in those positions because they can be influential on where housing policy goes. But jumping into it, as far as where I've come in my career, I think this will be the longer answer I give you out of the 3, because it's been a bit of a winding road. But I hit my career started, or I hit the streets in it was 2003. I got originally into commercial real estate, started out in brokerage, then was doing some debt, then got into equity, just in time for the world to explode. I was buying office buildings for a partner company of Carmel Partners. It was actually a fantastic job, really exposed me to acquisitions and what ultimately I love doing today. But unfortunately, it was short-lived when everyone got canned. And I was sent off into the wilds of no one's hiring for real estate for a while. So, again, as it typically goes with a lot of people's careers, it got a little weird, but I landed very luckily in something that was exciting to me. A friend of mine called me and said, "Hey, I bought a dairy farm and I'm restoring a bunch of the degraded wetlands there, and I'm going to get credits from state and federal agencies, and I'm going to sell those credits to developers when they impact similar habitat." And I said, "That sounds crazy, but I'm in. Let's. I have nothing better to do. I'll help you with that." So that ended up starting about what ended up being about 7 years that I spent in environmental restoration, specifically with the intent of creating mitigation banks, which anyone who's listening or watching would know. If they've ever done any greenfielding and impacted a wetland, the Army Corps of Engineers and other state agencies will come to them and say, "Hey, you need to get a permit. In order to get that permit, you have to mitigate for your impacts to the wetland or the habitat. And so you have to buy mitigation that's essentially like-kind mitigation." And we were basically doing that in advance and calling it a bank, and then selling those credits to developers. So I got to actually work with a whole host of developers, landowners, investment groups, and in a bunch of different capacities working around this world for about 7 years. And during that time, obviously, the market was recovering. And then towards the end of that, I was doing some work with the new home company. And Charles McCaig, who worked there at the time, was saying, "Hey, I'd love to hire you. Would you ever want to do land entitlement instead of getting environmental permits? Why don't you come get some homes approved?" So I joined him, not with the new home company. He actually was tapped by Meritage Homes to start a organization called Meritage Land Company Holdings, MLC Holdings, which still exists today as a separate entity, but it's changed and evolved quite a bit since the early days in 2015. So we were tasked basically by Meritage to be a separate land company, but to focus on really infill development around Southern California and Northern California, Bay Area stuff. A lot of it was infill. It ended up being fairly dense, a lot of townhome stuff. So we worked. So I basically, over the last 7 years, that's evolved. We delivered probably about 500 units in the core Bay over that time, and now we're currently working on about 2,500 units in some form of entitlement. Now, I'll say now it is seamlessly integrated into Barry Grant's Northern California division of Meritage. So I report to Barry Grant here in California in Sacramento. And Yeah, right now it's pretty wild. It went from, very core bay to honestly more greenfielding out in a lot of the areas where Meritage and other home builders are moving, which is the San Joaquin, the Solano, Sacramento, down into Monterey. A lot of those markets are now probably the best spots to do entitlement. And so that's what I'm actively engaged in now. And yeah, so I guess that's how I got here. And so, yeah, maybe next question.
Appreciate it. Hey, appreciate the thoroughness, and I love the backstory behind the environmental work, because
Pretty cool.
Nobody expects that type of transition. I mean, I've interviewed people who were nurses, people who are forensic scientists, as you and I talked about. But again, the environmental play, very seamless to say the least, in terms of the entitlements, the permitting process, to have that knowledge in place.
Very cool. And I'll add to that and say that it's really neat, and a lot, I think when we look to continue to add people to this industry, really do, like Charles McCaig looked outside of it and found an environmental consultant that was doing some zany stuff. Regardless, all of my skill sets were being built around working with state agencies, cities, counties, in finance, and just kind of pulling it all together and trying to get it all work seamlessly. And that's ultimately what we do as developers and home builders these days. And then I have to lay in there that during that time, I joined a planning commission for the city of Nevada. As soon as I moved here, met all the politicians, told them, what my thoughts were. Obviously, it helped that I was doing environmental restoration. They weren't thinking I was just some evil home builder that wanted to tear down the rec center, right? So that helped me onto the planning commission, and I still sit there today, and it's been maybe about 7 years now. So hopefully they keep me on there. There's a lot happening.
I'd vote for you, Justin.
Thank you, man.
So Justin, second question for you. What was the most inspirational moment that has shaped your career path?
That's a really good question. I think what's making me love what I do, so this will feed into the third question I know you're going to ask. It was my first public hearing. Not as a planning commissioner. Actually, this is what kind of spurred me to become a planning commissioner, because I wanted to see it from the other side. But for anyone who's watching, and I don't know if you've ever attended one, Mark, but if you go to a public hearing, you are the presenter, and it's your project on the line. And there's been, arguably years of time spent to get there, and done all this work. And in the end, the fate of your project is in a lot of cases held in little old woman that's, a part-time librarian who's also happens to be a city council person. And it's wild. It's a white knuckle ride. There's so much. I mean, I remember leaving my first one and being jacked for 2 days, could barely sleep. And, whether it goes wrong or it goes right, it always seems to be a roller coaster. And if it goes flawlessly, then you really did a lot of good work. But you should always be prepared for it to go wrong, as many people watching will have experienced. But if you haven't gone to a public hearing for any of your projects, I very strongly encourage you to do so. But that sort of the adrenaline that comes out of that and the satisfaction is definitely made me do everything I'm doing today and really push into the development side of things, not just building homes, but really doing the entitlement. And then, of course, sitting on the planning commission and seeing, and I typically really try to favor the developers and thank them for what they've done to get there, because I appreciate it. And I also appreciate how hard staff works to get it there. Yeah. And, a lot of planning commissioners and councils act like it's no one's done anything and they just showed up and they're asking to jam 1 million homes in their backyard. So they're upset. They don't understand everything that went into it. So anyhow, I love that part of this job. Awesome. And that's what got me to do this.
Appreciate it. So Justin, third and final question, theme behind the whole show. Why do you do what you do? Sure.
Well, on the heels of what I just said, which is definitely, I love the challenges that we face currently in specifically in Northern California, definitely in the Bay Area, and now increasingly in some of these other suburban markets, Sacramento, et cetera. I love the challenge that we have as home builders and developers. Regardless of what you're trying to build, there's a lot of contending interests. Trying to get everyone to work together, find some sort of happy medium is really fulfilling for me. And it's like an endless Rubik's Cube. It's a problem to solve. And I love it. I love that. I also love that my day-to-day, my week-to-week, my quarter-to-quarter goals change constantly. My focus changes constantly, and I'm a spazzy guy, so I really do like changing it up all the time. And that's been really, really great. And then the people, honestly, I mean, not just everyone in the industry, but also like I now get to manage a team, and I've been very blessed that I got to handpick them. And I have, I have 4 exceptional people that work with me who are not only really skilled at everything they do and are just absolutely knocking it out of the park. They're actually really cool and fun to be around and have good attitudes, and that goes so far, especially after all this COVID and us being stuck at home. And it's so encouraging to get to see them frequently. And then, there's been so much to learn in this business. There's so many good mentors that I've had along the way. And I encourage everyone out there not to just look for a sole mentor, but just try to learn something from pretty much everyone around us. This industry is so vast. There's everything from the raw land, and all the different asset types, whether it's apartments, whether it's housing, whether it's commercial, whether it's retail, whether it's hotels. There's a whole mix of assets there, and it all kind of gets plugged into land development. And frankly, we're all going to be looking at a lot of mixed use in the future. So getting comfortable with that, there's always a lot to learn there. I encourage everyone to meet all the other presidents and all the other shops. There's something to learn from pretty much everyone. And that's, again, what I really like about this industry, and why I'll continue to do what I do.
Awesome, Justin. I appreciate you noting at that, because that is the point of these videos, is the point of these interviews, is to touch as many people as we can get, pull in the resources, tell people stories, to let the younger professionals of the Bay Area and the National Association of Home Building know that they are not the only people that have been in this position. Pass those stories down, pass those resources. So, Justin, really appreciate you taking the time today to have this conversation with me. Can't wait to share your story, and we'll talk soon.
I appreciate it. And have anyone reach out if they have any other questions. I always want to guide people in the right direction.
Sounds good.
Thanks,
you, Justin. Mark. Have a great day.
Thanks for the opportunity. Take care.
Yeah, bye-bye. And that concludes another episode. I'm your host, Mark Sherlock, and always remember, why you do what you do.